Hello, welcome to AAUW Connections. Tonight we're going to have kind of a lighthearted topic, and it's going to be poetry. And here to talk to me about poetry is the man who is essentially the poet laureate of Los Altos and Los Altos Hills.
Why, thank you, Marge.
And his name is Bob Simon. And I think many of us have all been somewhere where we've heard Bob recite some of his poetry. His poetry is humorous, often thought-provoking, sometimes tugs at our heartstrings, and always very enthusiastically received. So first, we're going to talk to Bob a little about the background. What are the makings of a poet? Tell us a little about yourself, about your life. Were you always a poet? Did you always write poetry?
I think the fast answer is no. I found one or two poems that I apparently had written as either a grade schooler or in high school.
Oh, so that early, yes.
Yes, but just one or two. And then it wasn't until we got back from an overseas experience with Stanford Research Institute that I wrote a poem for an office Christmas party. And I was 35 or 37 years old at the time, and that was when I really started writing poetry as an adult.
But you, even then, you were otherwise, that wasn't your vocation.
No, I was in college. I was an economics major, and I was in ROTC, so I was in the Air Force for 3 years as a pilot, and then came back and went to the Stanford Business School, majored in just the general management program at the MBA program there, and then went on into various occupations. And so the writing of poetry was always very peripheral, just something I did for pleasure.
For fun. And so you say it was about age 35, more or less, when you wrote this poem for a Christmas party.
An office Christmas party, yes.
And you read it aloud?
I did, yes.
So tonight, of course, our treat is that we're going to be hearing a sampling of your poetry. And I seem to recall in one of our conversations, you were saying that your poetry especially is meant to be heard and to be read, maybe even more so than to be studied or analyzed. So what did you mean by that?
Well, I think that's right. I think that most of the time when I've written a poem, there's been either a special occasion or something has attracted my attention. For example, I have one poem here that I might start with tonight.
Yes, that would give us...
Is based on a special occasion.
Was this one of your earlier poems?
Actually, this poem was written right after my one and only book of poetry was published, which I would love to talk about at some point here tonight. But we went to a wedding in North Carolina, and my wife is interested in genealogy. And so at the wedding rehearsal dinner, I wrote a poem, I read a poem that I had written, and the poem was addressed to the bride and groom, and it was called Future Ancestors Club, an Invitation.
Oh, that's great.
And it goes like this. My resident genealogist helps set the record straight by searching courthouse, tome, and tomb to nail each fateful date. She annotates each birth and marriage, each precious fact of life, so future generations will, with ancestors, be rife. She's even taken to the web in her relentless quest to catalog our great-great-greats, though ere long laid to rest. It strikes me that these fond forebears, to merit such exhuming, had to exercise and exercise productive bill and cooing. You see, if there's no pitter-patting offspring to reward you, no self-fulfilling progeny will be there to record you. If you would be an ancestor, you must do your part to join our sacred order. You must exert your heart. If you would raise the birth rate, you must increase your heart rate. So be prepared to practice, and practice every night to turn an ancient ritual into a perfect rite. Initiation time is here, and soulmates we thee dub. You can't resist this call to arms. Welcome to the club.
Oh, I'll bet that was great. I I can imagine that was very well received, wasn't it?
I think they
A little
laughed in the right.
surprised me.
Yes, yes. I think they laughed in the right places.
Good, and a little of the fertility issues.
That's right. They seem to understand what I was saying. I'll
Yeah,
put it
I'm
that way.
sure. Now, today's poetry, well, not only just today's, but certainly maybe going back a number of years, but relatively modern poetry, often doesn't rhyme. But yours does,
Yes.
correct? Now, this is important to you that your poetry rhyme. Why?
Well, I think it's because of my my age. I think I'm of an age where I'm just used to more rhyming poetry. I grew up with Robert Frost. I grew up with Robert Service. I grew up knowing Casey at the Bat. All of these poems and all of these poets rhymed. And I have been guilty of saying on more than one occasion that my poetry will never appear in the New Yorker magazine for 3 reasons. 1, it rhymes. 2, it has meter. And 3, you can understand it.
There you go. Too bad, Bob. You might be able to correct 1 or 2, but all 3 is
I could
just...
mess something up and maybe get into the New Yorker, that's true.
Now, you have I thought, a little interesting, funny and interesting story relating to poetry that rhymes versus poetry that doesn't rhyme, and a Caltrain contest. Would you tell us about
That's
it?
exactly right. About 4 or 5 years ago now, Caltrain had a contest, a poetry contest that was linked to Valentine's Day. So the poem had to have 3 qualities. It had to talk about love, it had to talk about trains, and it had to be about 100 words or less. So I entered a poem. Well, when the contest was over, I discovered to my dismay that the first prize went to a poem that was written in blank verse. It did not rhyme. The second prize was another poem in blank verse. And the third prize went to a poem written in haiku.
Oh, better yet.
And these are all love stories, love poems. Well, I thought,
Were they in fact, or were they about the love of trains? I mean, were they truly
I honestly,
geared to
I don't
Valentine's
remember.
Day?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But shortly after the contest was over, I got a phone call from Caltrain, and they said they were going to put up 10 posters in the San Jose station and an identical set of 10 posters in the San Francisco station. Each poster would have the picture of a train and a poem on it, and they wanted to put my poem on one of those 10 posters. And of course, I was absolutely delighted. And I'd like to read that poem for you now.
And incidentally, that's the poster right
Yes,
there,
and
isn't it?
The poster is over here tonight, so you can see how they
Posted,
set it up. And,
yep.
and I was really flattered that they would want to do
Well,
that.
yeah, I would say.
And it pleased me very much. And my poem is entitled, My Princess of Caltrain. I've searched from diesel to caboose, and still I search in vain. I know that she must be on board, my Princess of Caltrain. I hear her voice at every stop. Or am I just dozing? I dream her words are meant for me. The doors are now closing. I trust her metaphor for life, her words of love and care. She's telling me to stay on track, that there's no time to spare. I listen with both ear and heart to what she's disclosing. She thinks I can, she thinks I can. The doors are now closing.
Now, that deserved a first place, certainly. But at least you did get that publicity. How long were those posters up?
Oh, I would say probably 6 weeks or so.
Oh, and at both stations.
At both stations.
Oh, you really increased your number of readers, I should say.
I would
didn't
hope.
you?
I would hope. Yes.
So that was one occasion for which a special occasion. How did you find out, incidentally, about the contest?
It was in the paper, and one of our friends called my attention to the announcement, and we went from there.
Okay, because 5 or 6 years ago, you were well into your poetry writing career. You were very well known at that point, locally, certainly, for your poetry.
And that's probably why one of our friends said, Bob, have you seen this article? And that was it.
So that was for one special purpose. but you also have written poems, I know, for many other occasions. And we're talking about this poem, which was for Valentine's Day. And you've had some other Valentine's poems, haven't you?
Well, I have. I wrote a Valentine's poem which I call Advice to the Lovelorn. And it goes like this. To good St. Valentine's dismay, some soul declared the shortest way to the heart of a blasé male is by the well-worn tummy trail. Yet traveling south from head toward toe, at the stomach there's a ways to go. Still, students of the human form, you're getting warm.
So that was a Valentine's poem.
I think you could call it that,
Yes, that sounds good to me. And that would only be written by a man,
I see.
I
Okay.
think. Now, another special occasion for which you wrote a poem, and again with very wide listenership, was at Stanford, was it not?
That's true. It was very interesting when Stanford celebrated its centennial back in 1991. They had a very big celebration in the Stanford Stadium. They had about 35,000 people there, and they brought in special lights. This is when the old stadium, no lights and so on, so they fixed everything up. And then Ted Koppel was master of ceremonies. And about 2/3 of the way through the program, Ted Koppel stepped to his microphone and he said, "In your printed program tonight is a centennial poem by Bob Simon." And then he read the last 4 lines of the poem as a way of introducing Joan Baez singing a Bob Dylan song.
Did you know that he was going to do that?
I did not.
Oh my goodness.
And so after the evening was over, when the lights came on and my wife and I stood up to leave, a Stanford trustee came over to where we were standing, and he looked at me, and with incredulity ringing in his voice, he said, "Bob, was that you?"
Are you the Bob Simon?
Centennial, the poem. So now my alma mater confronts her jubilee. How does she, like all grand dames, grow old so gracefully? I was so young at Stanford when I went there to learn. How could I know that Stanford kept something in return? How could I see that Stanford traded me for truth, took just a pinch of callow and a sliver of my youth? It balanced the equation, that Stanford swap sublime. I badly needed growing, and all I had was time. Today I am more seasoned, perhaps I am more sage. She too is growing older, yet Stanford does not age. Renewed by each new student by whom her hymn is sung, she stays forever Stanford. She stays forever young.
And so that's one of those, as I talked about earlier. There's a little, not only has a little touch of humor, but it's thought-provoking, a little tugging of the heartstrings.
I think so.
Now, you had submitted this poem for the centennial.
What had happened was that I had found out who was going to be putting together that very big program. Whoopi Goldberg was going to be on the program,
my.
Michael Feinstein, Joan Baez. So I thought, well, I had written the poem many years before because Stanford had sent out a call. Does anyone out there have any poetry that they'd like to submit in connection with the centennial, or any songs? And so I wrote the poem in response to that invitation. But then years went by, I'd say 3 or 4 years before this big program. And so when the program came along, I sent the poem in to the director of the program for his consideration.
At the time, when it was really time for this thing.
Yes, but he gave me no assurances, and in fact, he just thanked me for the poem and said, "Bob, this is show business. I don't know what, if anything, we're going to do with this poem." So I was just delighted when Koppel started using it.
And I assume that one of the reasons the trustee knew you was because you had worked for Stanford for so
For
many
about
years.
15 years at that time, and we had gotten acquainted, and so We had exchanged ideas, and I think he had been very helpful to Stanford in other ways, and so he spotted me in the crowd and went over and chatted with me.
What a lovely moment. Again, one of somewhat heart-tugging. Now, my favorite poem that you have ever written, speaking of tugging at the heartstrings, as you know, this is my favorite. I would really appreciate it if you would read it tonight.
All right. Well, Marge, if you will recall, it was back in 1980 when my wife, Annette, whom I often will call Annie, went to lunch with her friend Cynthia. And for reasons lost to antiquity, they got onto the subject of the color of women's hair. And Annie said to Cynthia, "You know, Cynthia, I still think of myself as a blonde." And Cynthia said, "Face it, Annie, you are really gray."
Oh, who needs friends like that?
That's right. And that story got home to me, and the result was once a blonde. A dear friend chose to make it plain just the other day. "Your hair," she said to my sweet wife, "is absolutely gray." This startled me, for when we'd met, a quarter century back, Annette's hair was golden blonde, as mine was almost black. Now, with the passing years, I knew fair youth I had relinquished, as day by day my mirror said I grew more distinguished. Yet Annie hadn't turned a hair, no change from ear to ear, at least I thought she hadn't, till the statement by her peer, "Perhaps I'm less observant than I was just yesterday, but even I can plainly see this friend's close curls are gray." Well, no matter what the truth may be, perhaps it's just the light. But Annie, to these tired old eyes, will be my blonde bride tonight.
I love it.
Well, I'll tell you something. I recited that once at an alumni function on an alumni weekend, and in the audience was a fraternity brother of mine who looked like a football player, big and burly and so on. And he came up after I'd recited that poem, and he says, "Bob, don't you ever do that again."
I understand. I can really buy into that feeling. I practically never cry. I kind of pride myself on that. But that poem just always moves me to tears. It's just beautiful.
Thank you very much.
So that's my favorite poem of yours. Do you have a favorite poem?
Well, as a matter of fact, I have one that I've written relatively recently, about, I guess 3 or 4 years ago now. Our oldest grandchild got married. We have 4 boys and a girl. This is a boy. His name is Jake. And when Jake got married, I recited one of my usual wedding roast toasts, and I did it in rhyme. So as you listen to this poem, you need to remember that I am talking to our first grandson. "You owe me big time, Mr. Jake. At least that's my initial take. I've sent so many skills your way, so many traits, such DNA. I gave you wit and sharp retorts. We dance with grace, excel in sports. We go through life without a care. We're both so doggone debonair. A winning pair for me and thee, good looks and fetching modesty. Also from me, it's no rumor, perspicacity and humor. Whence cometh all your savoir-faire? Put her there, grandson, put her there. More winning ways passed through your mom, composure and aloof aplomb. But what about your dad, you say? No shining role for him to play? Well, he blessed you with hearth and home, but more? Just one Y chromosome. Never mind the clothes you're wearing. Where'd you get your regal bearing? I jest a little here and there, yet we share much for which we care. We've set our aspirations high as both of us reach for the sky. Yes, all in all, from what I've seen, you carry no recessive gene. As for the debt I said you owe, on second thought, that isn't so. The scales are balanced, are they not? You've given as good as you got. We're just as even as can be. You made a grandfather of me."
Oh, Wonderful. What a lovely gift for Jake too, to have that poem.
Thank you, thank you.
And in the page, I don't know if we can show it, but the page on which you have the poem written has a picture of you holding Jake as an infant. Which
That's
is
right, that's right.
very, very nice. Now, we've heard a number of your poems, but I know you've written many more. In fact, I know that you have had a book published of poetry. Tell us a little bit about that. When was it published? How did it come to be?
Well, this book, which was published in the year 2000, contains 40 poems, and each poem is illustrated by a wonderful book illustrator named Mary Burkhart. And of course, you know Mary, because at your invitation, I gave a program at the Rotary Club in Los Altos back in about 1998, I think. Mary was there. She heard the program.
Right, she was a member at that time.
She was a member. She heard the program and she said, "Bob, have you ever published?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, would you like to?" And I said, "Sure." And so she said, "Well, my husband is a book designer and I'm a book illustrator. Let's talk." And so I took bottles of wine over to their place of an evening and we discussed how many poems should be in the book and so on and so forth. And one thing led to another. And in August of 2000, an 18...
I'm going to hold this up if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I don't know whether all our viewers have gotten to see the book, but continue talking. I just want to give people a chance to see it.
Well, an 18-wheeler backed into our cul-de-sac in August of 2000 and dropped a pallet of 1,000 books on our driveway.
Oh, my goodness.
And I had to do something, so I started reciting poems at various service clubs, church groups, and so on. And a few months after those first 1,000 arrived, I ordered 500 more, and now they're all gone.
So you have there are at least 1,500 of these in print
out there someplace.
Oh my, that's really remarkable. That is. How many poems are in the book?
There are 40 in the book, and Mary illustrated each of them.
So that's really if somebody, are they still available anywhere?
They are out of print, but I said that to one of my wife's friends once, and she said, "We'll see about that." And the next thing I knew, she was bringing it over to have me sign, and I don't know where she got it.
Oh.
But there may be a used book market out there someplace.
Maybe so, through Amazon or something.
Something like that, possibly.
So that was 2000, did you say, 1999?
Published in 2000.
And there were 40 poems in the book, but of course you had written many more. Those are the 40 you selected. How many poems have you written since then, do you know? Do you think?
I'm going to guess another 15 or 20.
Okay. Now, and you all, 15 or 20 in that, so at least one a year, if not more, maybe two a year.
Maybe.
Now, what kind of occasions? You write very often when someone asks you to write a poem for some special. I remember, for example, that we had a drive for the Los Altos Library, their endowment fund, and you wrote a poem. What are some other kinds of events?
Well, there was a school bond election one year, and to kick off that campaign for the school bond, I was asked to write a poem. And so I wrote one about that, and I called it Poetry Lesson. And that one is short, and it goes like this. What was my best teacher's yearning? Not great teaching, just great learning. She taught me how to see in time. Where there's reason, there's rhyme.
Perfect, especially for a school bond issue. And that was at the kickoff, you say?
That was at the kickoff breakfast for the school bond issue.
Well, we have another few minutes. We probably have 3 or 4 minutes. I think we do. And so just time maybe to have one more poem.
All right, I'll recite my most dangerous poem.
Oh, okay.
And the reason is
we'll
because...
fasten our seatbelts, huh?
Yes, because often in my audience, I don't know the marital status of the people that I'm reciting before. And this poem is about a lovely couple who fell in love and married after they had both been previously married and both had been widowed. So here we have this couple. You now know their circumstance. You know it's a second marriage for them, but that they're living a very happy life together. And so I've written down a little statement here that I'd like to read to you. Second marriages in which both partners are widowed are not uncommon. The question arises, how are such marriages viewed from afar? Very afar. What if the two former partners up in heaven were to meet, compare notes, and issue a joint communique?
Oh my.
Here is a message from Cloud 9.
Okay.
Oh, we know these things just happen, and suddenly you're more than friends. Then we who know you best soon yearn to learn how this beginning ends. Now you harbor mixed emotions for just what might our feelings be. We could be more surprised than pleased. You think about eternity. Yet what might escape your notice, so limited your earthly view, love can also bloom in heaven. Oh boy, have we got news for you. You look away from our reunion. We four together seems unreal. You fear things might get, well, complex. We know exactly how you feel.
That was, and where did you read this poem?
I have recited it at, just various club events since it was written about 4 years ago.
Okay, and I'll bet that goes over well.
I
You know,
usually get
especially in clubs with older audiences where there are often
Exactly right.
marriages.
And we had dinner guests one night who were exactly in this situation, and I was fearful of reciting the poem and finally did so. And as that man left that night, he said, "Bob, please send me the poem." And a week later, his wife wrote me and said, "We have had it framed. It now hangs on our bedroom wall."
Oh, wonderful. So you have really had a really full second career, as it were.
I really have.
And thanks, you know, all of our thanks for that, because we in the community have certainly been beneficiaries, as well as all the people at the various Rotary clubs all over the Bay Area where you have recited your poetry.
Well, thank you
And,
very much, Marge.
It was just perfect. Thank you so much for coming tonight and reading us all your poetry, and thank all of you for watching AAUW Connections.